Hello everyone, this is Carson, Fouts, Dominic, Jiang, and my Salerno's presentation on the Cultural Revolution in China. The Cultural Revolution was launched in 1966 by Mao Zedong to make his political return and regain his power. There were four main methods of the genocide that took place: mass terror dictatorship, killings of innocent and armed civilians by the armed forces, pogroms, and alleged conspiratorial groups. There were multiple different leaders in China working for Mao. The result of the Cultural Revolution was that China had many political reforms, economic reforms, and educational reforms. The idea of communism started in Russia in 1917, and it was introduced to China 3 years later. Mao immediately joined the Chinese Communist Party, also known as the CCP. During the development of communism in China, Mao had very different ideas as to how communism should run compared to ideas of communism in Russia. The Russians believed that the city industrial workers were the major group of people during the revolution, while Mao believed that the peasants were the significant group due to the majority of the Chinese population being peasants. There were many obstacles during the development of communism in China. The party was in control of China at the time. The Nationalist Party didn't like the communists and forced them to unpopulated areas in China. However, the CCP was able to take control of China after winning against the Japanese invasion, and the nationalists were forced to flee to Taiwan. The main event that led up to the Cultural Revolution was the Great Leap Forward, also launched by Mao. The Great Leap Forward was similar to Stalin's Fire Plan, which aimed to industrialize Russia. Similar ideas and introduced the Great Leap Forward, aiming to industrialize China by taking the lands from the people and organizing them into farm cooperatives. All production, resources, and food distribution was strictly controlled by the CCP. Large-scale projects such as the backyard steel furnaces were built to increase industrial production and were introduced in urban areas. However, things didn't turn out the way Mao wanted. Agricultural production failed by large numbers due to the killing of sparrows, which Mao believed were the major pest on grain crops, resulting in massive locust storms and famine in the country, killing millions of people. Due to the failure in planning and coordination and resulting material shortages, the industrial production also failed. As a result of those failures, Mao lost his power and control of the people and the government. 5 years later, Mao launched the Cultural Revolution to regain his power and control in the government. Between the time of Cultural Revolution and the Great Leap Forward, with the help of his wife Jiang and Lin Biao, Mao's justification for the start of the Cultural Revolution was to regain control of the government. He believes that the current leaders in China and the CCP are going in the wrong direction. Mao believed that he could lead the country to a greater future with his beliefs and values. The genocide took place in 4 different periods. The first period was known as the Red Terror, which took place at the start of the Cultural Revolution in 1966. During this period, Mao shut down all the schools and formed the Red Guards, with the majority being students and young citizens. The Red Guards attacked and killed people who didn't support the revolution and the government. They attacked and killed the intellectual and elderly in China because Mao believed that they would get in the way of reaching their goals, which was getting rid of the old customs, old cultures, old habits, and old ideas.
The mass killings during and after the Cultural Revolution in China have been classified as a secret by the Chinese Communist Party. Because of this, many of the details, such as the number of people that died, vary in answer, and they have even been classified as abnormal deaths. The genocide has 4 different main methods of genocide. The first method of genocide that took place is mass terror or mass dictatorship encouraged by the government. Here, victims were humiliated and then killed by mobs or forced to commit suicide on the street or other public places. The second method of genocide was all general types of killings by the armed forces on citizens without weapons. The third method of genocide was attacks against specific groups of people. This is known as pogroms, and it was against traditional class enemies in China. It was led by people like security officers, militias, and mass. The final method of genocide that took place was targeted killings of alleged conspiratorial groups. Most of the genocide that took place was done by the Red Guard in China, which was a large group of students led by Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party. The total number of deaths is not completely known, but they range from 500,000 all the way up to 8 million. One of the first specific examples of genocide that took place in China is known as the Daoshan or the Dao County Massacre. This took place when rumors were spread about the anti-revolutionaries or the people who were against the Chinese Cultural Revolution. People thought that these anti-revolutionaries were going to wipe out the Communist Party, so in return they started a real massacre that killed over 4,500 people in only the first 2 months. Many of the people that were killed belong in one of these 5 groups: landlords, rich farmers, counter-revolutionaries, which were the anti-revolutionaries, bad influencers, and rioters. Victims here were killed in various different ways, including being shot, decapitated, buried alive, or even blown up with explosives. When it was all over, 1,400 people died, and this got super out of hand. Some other specific events of genocide that took place in China are the cannibalism in Guangxi province. Another event was the cleansing of the class ranks campaign. And finally, the flesh banquets in Wangxin, Guangxi. The cleansing of the class ranks campaign is just as it sounds. It is an attempt to wipe out the counter-revolutionaries who are against the Communist Party in China. Overall, in this event, 22,900 people were killed and over 100,000 people were arrested. The deaths that come from this event are due to injuries that they have received from being tortured, enforced suicides, or executions that took place. The cannibalism and flesh banquets are also just as they sound. Many of the victims here were not cannibalized due to starvation, but rather as a commitment to political ideology.
During the Chinese Cultural Revolution, we see the rise of a few leaders that play a huge role in the Cultural Revolution genocide. The first main leader that came into power was Mao Zedong. Mao holds the biggest role in the Cultural Revolution, as he is the leader who launched the revolution in 1966 and is basically the start of everything as the chairman of the CCP, or Chinese Communist Party. He was also the first chairman of the People's Republic of China from 1949 until 1959. The second leader that also had a huge impact during the Cultural Revolution was Lin Biao. Lin played the role of Mao's right-hand man during the revolution and was named Mao's successor in 1971, but ended up dying shortly after in a plane crash. Another main leader from the Cultural Revolution was Jiang, better known as Mao Zedong's loyal wife. Jiang plays a highly important secondary role, such as Lin did. Jiang's most important roles were the formation of the Gang of Four, a group of her and 3 other high-ranking Chinese officials tasked with implementing harsh policies put forward by Mao and the Communist Party in China, while also taking on the role as Mao's secretary. A final main leader of the Cultural Revolution genocide was the Red Guard, who was a student army led by Mao Zedong, and who were tasked with getting rid of anyone who opposed the revolution. One short-term effect of the Chinese Cultural Revolution was a change in leadership of China. When Mao Zedong died, he was unofficially replaced by Deng Xiaoping, who leaned much more towards capitalism as the undisputed leader of the country. Another result was international economic reforms, such as more participation in the international economy and the introduction of more Western-oriented diplomatic initiatives which sped up the country's modernization process. The domestic economy of China was also affected by the Cultural Revolution, with greater autonomy for rural farmers and privatization of urban businesses. Political reforms were also another result of the revolution, when millions of former political pariahs were released from labor camps, which caused clashes between the Chinese citizens who wanted more reforms and the Communist Party who wanted to prevent them. The political crashes boiled over by way of the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989, where tens of thousands of students blocked the square while protesting for more democratic reforms and were fired upon by the military. This caused many sanctions to be enforced on China by other countries and caused them to lose much support. Finally, the Cultural Revolution caused educational reforms, more focus on technological and scientific studies, and choosing scholarly admissions based on very competitive examinations. The Chinese Cultural Revolution genocide has caused many long-term results in the country, such as very prevalent bureaucratic timidity throughout the government. The genocide showed even the leaders today that future shifts in policy would jeopardize the officials who had aggressively implemented the previous policies. The other major long-term effect that the Cultural Revolution genocide had on China was the massive generation gap that it created in Chinese society. The people who were at a young age when the genocide occurred had been denied an education and taught to redress their grievances by taking to the streets. This lost generation will always be involved in Chinese society until it begins to disappear.